Israel aiming for? What would Iran's response be? What was the U.S. role or President Trump's foreknowledge, et cetera? Some of those clouds have cleared, but some of them are still really confusing the viewer, if you will, or rather, it is shrouding all of this this conflict still in some very critical ways. So President Trump has given somewhat conflicting comments throughout, but he has made it clear at this point that he had foreknowledge, that he essentially didn't say no, but also made no attempt to associate the U.S. directly with it. Indeed, Secretary Rubio made it clear this was not our conflict. But he has continued to make comments that now begin to tilt in the direction of let's bring this to a halt, time to give peace a chance, and so forth. He goes so far as to suggesting he thinks it's possible to have an agreement of some kind between Iran and Israel, not just a nuclear agreement between the US and Iran. So that's one thing that's cleared up a bit, but still there are some very critical issues undefined, ill-defined at this point. For instance, does he understand where Netanyahu is going with this campaign? So that takes me to the second piece, which is what are the war aims? And I know Frank is going to talk about this in detail, but for me as a lay person, but watched a lot of conflicts, there have been shifting declarations on the part of the prime minister, initially suggesting this was nuclear and military focused campaign to disable, I'll use that generally neutral term, doesn't really tell you how far disabling goes. It didn't say destroy the nuclear program, but disable it, do it severe damage. And yet, he himself has made some provocative statements, including one in the last hours suggesting to a questioner, because of these news reports that he proposed going after the Supreme Leader and President Trump said no, but asked about this, he sort of dismissed it as, well, this won't really escalate things as such. And also making other comments that would suggest there's a whiff of, more than a whiff of regime change in the air. Also, the targeting has expanded. So whereas it was firmly focused on nuclear infrastructure and nuclear know-how in the guise of scientists, military infrastructure, key commanders, now you see a mix of energy targets and also things like a major Tehran Police Command headquarters and the Ministry of Interior. What's that about? You couple that with that whiff of regime change in the air and the exhorting of the Iranian public to recognize the chance that Israel, as he said on Friday, would be clearing the way for the Iranian people. It is getting into a very different territory today on Monday versus on Friday. And then finally, you have Iran, and I think there's, for the moment, things are much clearer there, which is to say, disabled, disaggregated, confused, putting back in place new occupants, new commanders of these key positions, but still a certain slow-footedness of response. And a lot of this is not just the confusion piece, but also looking at its, what it's got in the larder for a response. So a lot of fulmination on one side, including declarations of an intent to go after the U.S. for its treacherous role in all of this. And we can get into this in detail in a few minutes. I'm skeptical that the Iranians are going to open another front. I think they've got quite enough on their hands. And there are, at least today, some informal indications that they are looking for an exit ramp, which that will put this game, this will put the ball between Trump and Netanyahu and see whether they are aligned at all in terms of the outcome or the aims of this campaign. I'll stop there.
That's great, Barbara. Yeah, we've already got some questions that are going to pick up right on where you left off. So that's terrific. General, how about you? What are your thoughts? What has struck you so far? What should we be thinking about?
First of all, Ken, thanks. Always great to be with y'all. And as always, Barbara got us off to a great start. Um, I'll begin with just an overall observation, then I got about five or six sort of more granular observations. I do believe that regime change is on the table in Tel Aviv, and I think that represents a thing we should be very familiar with in the United States: mission creep, um, where you have astonishing initial success. And so your goals tend to expand as the horizon opens ahead of you. So I think perhaps when they went into this, they were looking at a more narrowly targeted campaign, but the inability to defend themselves and the success the Israelis have had opens new vistas for you. So it's a tremendous amount of energy behind commanders to push forward then when you're at that particular point. So I think certainly, I think the broadest possible thing that could be said is regime change is on the table either as a forcing mechanism to bring the Iranians to negotiate or as an end to itself. I think you can sort of pick and choose, and we'll see maybe the way Israel goes forward with that in the days ahead. So some very specific things, and Barbara hit on this. The first thing is what hasn't happened is Iran has not chosen to attack our basing structure in the region or our allies in the region, or to do something they could do that I think would cause us great problems, and that would be to mine the Strait of Hormuz. They have not chosen to do any of those things. And let's recall that Iranian attacks against Israel have been less than overwhelming because of range, because of Israeli capabilities, because of a variety of factors. Many of those things that tend to reduce Iranian effectiveness will be removed if they're firing at Al Udeid or Al Dhafra or cities just across the Arabian Gulf from Iran. So the fact they have not chosen to widen the conflict is, I think, very, very important. And that's the thing I look at more than anything else because that'll tell you the state of Iranian thinking. The second point is it's very interesting that the Israelis have left parts of the nuclear program untouched. And that's not by accident. They're not doing anything by accident. So we should just wait and observe what happens here. If they're sending a signal to us, if they're sending a signal to the Iranians, or if it's by some other design. But that's a choice that they have made in their operational construct. The next point is the complete penetration of the Iranian government by Israeli intelligence. And by the Iranian government, I'm talking about the military, I'm talking about the IRGC, I'm talking about every aspect of the Iranian infrastructure has been penetrated. They've always been leaky, but this is truly an eye-watering inability to give any kind of OPSEC. And allied with that is, and Barbara talked to it a little bit, the incompetence of their response. They do not appear to have been effective in their response. Slow-footed is perhaps the kindest possible way we could describe their response. They are not in the game fully yet, and it's been very difficult for them to find out because a lot of their leaders are gone, and the ones that are probably alive are not eager to communicate with other leaders because of what's out there about when you send communications that sooner or later a bomb drops on your house. So I think that's significant and will further slow the Iranian response. Just two more quick things. I predict Israeli defenses are probably going to get better in the days ahead. I don't know the exact percentage of Iranian missiles that are getting through. I think it's a very small percentage, but one or two is a big in a country as small as Israel with large urban areas. One, two, three, four, or 10 missiles is a lot of missiles that get through. I think the Iranians are going to have trouble keeping this volley rate up in the days and weeks ahead. Israel will probably begin to take some measures to strike these systems in Iran and operate in Iran, which is the best place to go after the missiles anyway. But I think over time, Israeli defenses are going to get better. And I believe we are also moving forces into the region. I think we put a couple of ballistic missile shooters into what we call the East Med basket off the western coast of Israel, where we were able to participate in the defense of Israel last year. Those ships, I'm not exactly sure of their status, but I'm sure they'll be there very soon. And my last point would be, look, I think this is going to continue for a while. I don't think there's any motivation for Israel to end this right yet. I think Iran is struggling to find a lever to give them, to cause Israel to want to do that. But unless they choose to widen the war, and I'll just finish up by saying widen the war would be an attack on us, an attack on Sunni neighbors in the region, blocking the Strait of Hormuz. All of those things are going to tend to only increase pressure ultimately against the Iranian regime. And for a regime whose primary goal is self-preservation, they're in a very bad place right now. I think they're in the worst place they've been in modern memory, and they don't have a lot of very good options. And on that note, Ken, I'll stop.
That's terrific. That was great stuff, General. Alan, what stands out to you? What do you think that we should be thinking about?
Well, first, I'd like to, I think everything that both Barbara and the general have said is spot on. So I can't stretch out, what they said to 8 minutes. So I'll add my own insights. But yeah, the bottom line is this is Israel's world and we're just watching it right now in the sense that they can do what they want. And as the general said, now we're just watching to see, what their plans are. As Barbara said, it's clear it's more than the nuclear infrastructure. It's more than the military infrastructure. So we're going to see what their targeting is. Even though Iran has tried to retaliate, it seems obvious to me at least that they're not going to be able to do the amount of damage in Israel that's going to cause domestic pressure to get Israel to wind down before Israel wants to wind down. And on the international front, same thing. We all saw President Trump's comment about, sometimes you just got to let them fight it out. So I don't think there's going to be a sufficient effective pressure on Israel from any part or all parts together of the international community to stop before they want to stop. We've already seen in Gaza and elsewhere that when Israel feels threatened existentially, it's not going to pay attention to the international community and it's going to continue as it thinks best. It has freedom of operations in Iran right now, or at least over Tehran and some of the major cities. They're reaching as far away as Mashhad. Again, as Barbara said, they're taking out energy, which is going to be huge. Iran already has a massive energy shortage. That's going to be a lot worse coming this summer based on the strikes that Israel has already carried out. They took out IRIB, voice and vision, and they can do that at will. So basically, they're going to keep bombing until they feel they've achieved some type of goal they've got. I think they're still trying not desperately. I think they're quite eager to draw the U.S. into the fight. I agree, I think, with what the general implied. I think probably Israel has plans to deal with Fordo if it wants to, even without U.S. bunker busters. Obviously, Israel's put a lot of thought into all this. And even though Fordo right now is pretty untouched other than a restraining wall, it could well be that Israel has plans to take out Fordo without U.S. help. But I do think that Israel would like to have U.S. cooperation. For its part, again, as both the previous speaker said, Iran is totally on its back foot. It's just going to its well-worn, if not threadbare playbook. You've got the moderates and the reformists trying to indicate, as Barbara pointed out with the Wall Street Journal article and other articles, hey, we're willing to go back to the table. We all saw, I think, Foreign Minister Irakchi's tweet today saying all it would take for President Trump is to pick up the phone. So obviously, I think Irakchi and the diplomatic community there are eager to signal that if Israel stops, then Iran is willing to return to negotiations. That's not enough for Israel. I don't think that's going to be I don't think that's going to be effective. Again, we all know Iran is lobbying its other Gulf countries to put pressure on the U.S. I think Saudi Arabia, the UAE, to a lesser extent, Qatar and Oman do have a lot of sway with the U.S. government, but I don't see them effectively getting the U.S. to get Israel to slow down. And again, there's this steady drumbeat of hardliner statements. I read the editorial in today's Kayhan, which is a traditional conservative paper in Iran by Hossein Shariat Madari, who's an advisor to Khamenei and has been around since the beginning of the revolution, who says, in essence, see, I told you we should have withdrawn from the NPT, blocked the Straits of Hormuz, and kicked out all the IAEA inspectors. You can always find an IRGC general who will say something like, as one did today, even if Israel stopped fighting, we're going to keep bringing the fight against Israel until we've extirpated the threat. We're settling down for the long haul. So you've got IRGC elements, on the hardline side, say, we're in this for the long haul. And you've got other elements, more moderate in Iran, saying, we want to end this as quickly as possible, even if we have to take a strategic step backwards. So Iran really is playing off its back foot. A part of this problem, as Barbara alluded to, is that Supreme Leader Khamenei, who's the commander in chief, has appointed all these leaders who are killed. Unlike our system, these people have been around for a long time in their positions. They've built strong personal relationships with the supreme leader. He depends on their counsel, and they're all dead. So the question right now is, how effective is the supreme leader? Who's giving him advice? And, how much does he trust that person's advice? So there again, he could just be in a bunker somewhere being fed information with no real decision-making authority. We don't know. In terms of regime change, and this is what I find especially interesting, yeah, most definitely. I think Israel is going after not necessarily regime change, because I don't think they've got another regime in their pocket that they can plug in, but they're certainly eager to topple this regime. What they want, worst case for them is, they eradicate the nuclear infrastructure. They immiserate, Iran. They totally destroy Iran's ability for strategic power projection outside its borders. Best case is, just toppling the regime. Iran becomes, a near failed state with a government that exists in name only, but is increasingly unable to run the country. And then you sort of see what happens. And one final point, in terms of regime toppling, the regime is already changing. So if we're talking about regime change, Israel's already done it. What comes out of these attacks is going to be different than what happened before. But it's very likely that what we could get instead is perhaps a secular version of what we have now, which is an intelligence security state that has trying to have an iron grip on its own populace. Because as the general said, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So right now, the Iranian intelligence security services are mobilizing. They're looking for infiltrators. The Majlis speaker today, Ghalibaf, talked about, we've been infiltrated. Who lost Iran? We have spies, fifth column, so forth and so on. So they're mobilizing to show pictures on their mass media of captured Mossad agents and safe houses that have been discovered. So I think that Iran is going to try very hard to, round up the usual suspects. And so at least in the short term, I think you're going to get a very paranoid, tight, self-referential police state that also will decrease its efficiency. So yeah, Iran is whatever happens, Iran is going to emerge much weaker. And that's my opening comments.
That's terrific, Alan. Yeah, you actually knocked out a few of the questions there already. That was terrific. Okay, so we're getting lots of great questions. Barbara, I want to start with you because we've got several questions about the U.S. role in this, and in particular, a lot about this issue that, as you pointed out, Arakchi made the statement earlier today. So far, President has taken a very hands-off approach to this whole thing. What do you think might change that, right? Is there something out there that might cause President Trump to decide, what, I need to get involved, I need to end this? What might that be? And, what does he do when that happens?
So two immediate things that would trigger a shift. And obviously, as we discussed earlier, any attack on U.S. personnel, forces, facilities would trigger him to shift from spectator to active party, I think. And he's certainly asserting that in make no mistake kind of language. The second thing I think would be if Israel goes really wide on target sets in a way that looks like this is going to have a rippling effect outside of Iran on U.S. equities in some way, destabilizing in some profound way. I'm struck by the the fact, as Frank said, that the Iranians have not reverted to their normal playbook, which they did in hot summer of 2019. When squeezed, they squeeze back by squeezing the Gulf, commercial traffic, energy flows. Limpet mines show up on tankers all of a sudden. Gee, who did that? Or even attempting to block Strait of Hormuz. I suspect that there's just great uncertainty in the corridors of decision making in Tehran about whether or not the playbook looks provocative to the Americans, not to Israel. So, if the Israelis were to go for something that was straight up regime change, starts knocking, goes after the supreme leader or what have you, there will be an eruption among partners, Gulf partners, who are burning up the phone lines already. I think also the more he hears from people like Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed, Erdogan, the more he hears from them, this is killing us here. All of the air traffic is shut down. All of those massive flows of tourists through Dubai and Abu Dhabi shut down. Israel can take this kind of stuff, but this is not our world. Why are we having to pay for it? I do think they will remain very concerned that the Iranians lash out at them. I think, again, that is less likely than it was a few years ago, in part because they are making such an effort to keep a public distance between their governments and what Israel's doing or what the U.S. is saying. So that those first two points are where I think you get a sudden shift of Trump into more action-oriented. But I think over the next few years, he's just going to hear relentlessly from people like NBC and MBS.
Great. Thanks, Barbara. All right, General, also got one for you. Multiple people asking this question. You kind of alluded to it, and so they want to draw you out on this. Fordo, right? The Iranian enrichment facility at Fordo, the one that's deep underground, as Alan pointed out. Best anyone can tell, maybe a little bit of light damage there, but it doesn't seem like the Israelis have really gone after it. I will tell you from my own conversations, including with Israeli officials, what I've consistently heard is some variation of, if this ends with Fordo still functional, we have not achieved our objectives. So unpack a little bit. First, do the Israelis need us to deal with it? How might they be thinking about recognizing this is all idle speculation? But, how might the Israelis be thinking about Fordo? Why haven't they gone after it yet?
Sure, Ken. So Fordo is very, very deeply buried. The United States has special munitions that can penetrate down and get into the area that we would want to destroy. It has to be carried on the B-2. It's a special weapon. The only airplane in the world that can carry it, the only pilots that can fly that airplane are U.S. pilots. So it is a uniquely American capability. We've trained with that weapon for a number of years. It's featured various degrees in planning over my entire association with CENTCOM going back to 2010. And so that's a very real, uniquely American capability. There are other ways to get at that space. There are just other ways to get to that space, and I really can't say a lot more about that. I'm not going to be able to. You would call some of those heroic measures that you could use to get after that space. A number of nations have probably looked at that as a possibility. I take it at face value when the Israelis say if Fordo is untouched when they're finished, they will regard it as a failure. I think that's maybe a reasonable summary of the Israeli position. I would simply say the fact that it's untouched now, I would not presume anything about its future. And as the Israelis have shown us in every day, really, of this campaign, they've done some remarkably innovative things. And we just shouldn't assume that because, well, here's the way we'd strike the problem. The Israelis haven't found a way to strike the problem that may be completely different. And something that they haven't shared, or I certainly don't know anything about it. But Fordo is certainly on their list. In some way, form, or fashion, I'm certain they're going to get around to Fordo. It may be trying to get us into the conflict, but I think the only way, I'll build briefly on what Barbara said, I don't see how we get in unless we're attacked. And the Iranians have been very careful about not doing that up until now. So I think Fordo remains today an Israeli problem, and I'm sure they're giving it a great deal of thought and have some ideas about how to get after it.
So that house that I'm having built on the mountainside at Fordo, I should cancel that contract, right? Because that's not going to be good real estate in just a little while.
I wouldn't care to be anywhere within a couple of 3, 4, 5 miles of Fordo for any reason.
Fair enough. Okay, Alan, now one for you. Got a whole bunch of questions here, really interesting ones about Russia, China, particularly the Russian relationship with Iran, right? As a number of our questions are pointing out, it's kind of the dog that's not barking. President Putin seems to have gotten into it a little bit with President Trump, but what do we make of the Iran, the vaunted Iran-Russia alliance? Is that less than meets the eye? Is that just a shoe that has yet to drop? How do you think the Iranians are looking at the alliance with Russia? I mean, another way to think about it is, what does this say to the Iranians after this war is over? Should they, are they going to conclude, well, that wasn't worth anything anyway, because the Russians didn't come to our defense when we most needed them?
I don't think they expect Russian reinforcements at this point. I think that both Russia and China have tremendous utility for Iran right now in the context of the UN. I mean, we've seen the total inability of the United Nations to do anything, which is not unique to this situation. But yeah, I don't think Iran's looking to Russia for help right now. Now, perhaps in the future, it could well be, but I don't think it's. I mean, I think it's a strong relationship, and there's a lot that Russia's going to be able to do. I mean, again, Iran is a very adept player within its own strictures in the international community and certainly at the UN. And they like the Russian statement, they like the Chinese statement, they hated the European statement. I think the key question, a related question, perhaps one you didn't ask, is don't forget there's other things going on here, which is we still have the UNSCR that ends in October, right? So if nothing happens, then the UN sanctions on Iran get lifted by mid-October, right? We know that the E3 has already said they wanted to invoke snapback. So, I mean, this whole process obviously has taken a back seat based on the hostilities that started a few days ago, but that clock is still ticking. So, will the E3 do snapback, which, reimposes these harsh sanctions on Iran? There's already been talk brooded about, will Iran pull out of the NPT? Will it not? I don't think that's a decision Iran feels it needs to make in the next few days. They have more exigent concerns. But, when the whole issue of snapback and UNSCRs and what's going to happen to the UN, that's, I think, where Iran is going to be relying on Russia and to a lesser extent China for backup. But I don't think they expect, help from Russia at this moment on the front.
It's great, Alan. All right, Barbara, back to you. And we got, once again, I think I asked you the same thing last time you were on, but we got a lot more questions on it. And that's regional reaction, right? Lots of questions about how different countries are reacting. In particular, we've got a number of questions about the various Gulf states. So give us a quick run through. Feel free to summarize, but also I know you'll pick out the different governments, how they're responding to this, and in particular, got several questions. What could make them change? What could make them change their position either more favorably toward Israel, more favorably toward Iran, against us? But a number of questions about what could get them to change their stance.
So at this current state of play, with a very uneven, poorly matched combatants, they want it over, period. They want it brought down to a low boil. They view, rightly, correctly, only the White House, only President Trump being able to do that. I contrast this with the way they looked at sort of the clearing operation, the crashing clearing operation that the IDF, Shin Bet, Israeli Air Force did last fall vis-a-vis Hezbollah. They just methodically took the organization apart, decapitated it, not just at the top, very top, but 2, 3, 4 layers down, completely left the organization shattered, disaggregated, reeling, and its political standing really demolished in the country. None of the Gulf countries could say publicly what they said privately, which is great going, finally. And the landscape was cleared not only in Lebanon, but it had knock-on effect next door in Syria, as we know. This is a very different, conflict. They have put enormous amounts of time and energy into a détente with Tehran and a sort of effort to kind of coax the Iranians or coax Tehran to view calm and stability in the Gulf and, bolstering, vibrant economic activity as in Tehran's interest. And if Tehran would just play nicely and play by the rules, including on the nuclear piece, that eventually Tehran too could benefit directly from this. They had counted on being able to land that message with President Trump as of May, that there's an overall U.S. and regional and the partners' interest in a negotiated solution to Iran, and wrapping the U.S. into a network of new economic deals, new commercial deals, AI infrastructure in which major U.S. firms were taking part. All of this was supposed to be sort of the forward play, and then you have what is a really shocking bookend to May, which is this conflict. So they are going to bang on and on and on privately. I don't see them lambasting this administration, but they are going to press hard and use the personal channels to get to the president and get him to understand that this could destabilize all of the great hopes and great hopes for the U.S. as well, deals. So I don't think this moves them off that fence. I don't see them publicly aligning themselves with, in any way, certainly with a military campaign against Tehran, short of Tehran turning on them.
Outstanding. That was great around the horn. All right, General, got several for you, and I'm going to ask them in this way. Not asking you to second guess General Kurilla or Admiral Cooper, but put yourself back in your old shoes, your old stomping grounds down in Tampa as commander of U.S. Central Command. How would you be looking at the current conflict? What would be the issues of particular concern for you, right? What would you be having your staff focused on most? Do you feel like you've got enough, as you pointed out, anti-ballistic missile shooters there? Are there concerns about U.S. troops and their safety? How about our allies? But as you think about it, what stands out to you? Are we all good, or are there some areas we still need to work on?
Sure. So, Ken, the overriding number one priority for Eric Kurilla, like it was for me, is going to be the protection of U.S. forces, our embassy platforms, and our citizens in the region. So that's the CENTCOM commander begins and ends every day with that. Those are Americans out there. We have a mortal responsibility for them. So he's going to take that very seriously. So he's going to work. So they're working with everybody across the region, looking at force protection, looking at what we're doing, looking at all these other things. So that is an ongoing thing that will take up a considerable fraction of his day as he takes a look at it. The other thing that he'll spend a lot of time on is alliance and friends and neighbor assurance. You want to assure people that we're there, that we're going to be there, that we're going to be part of the solution to this when it occurs. So he will spend a lot of time talking to people across the region. We have a unique relationship with Israel. A lot of it's cloudy about exactly what's happening and what's not happening there. I don't know, so I can't say. But he'll spend a lot of time talking directly to Israel as they work their defense against Iranian attacks and all of that. So that among all the other countries in the region, Israel will also be one of those. And as you know, Israel came into Central Command in 2021, and that's allowed all of this to happen at a much higher and better degree of flexibility. I think the third thing is you want to maintain a deterrence posture against Iran. You want Iran to know that now is not the time to attack us. And if you do that, then you will suffer. And that's a military thing. The concept of deterrence is actually, I would argue, a diplomatic construct. And how General Kurilla supports that is, you look obviously ready to fight, and our capabilities obviously prepared to fight Iran if you want to fight. Above that level, that's what your national leadership and diplomats negotiate with Iran, not the U.S. military. But so he spent a lot of time working those particular things right now. But Ken, I go back to how I began. You begin every morning thinking about how our embassy's doing, how are our people doing, what about our basing structure, what are indications and warning out there of attacks on them? Do we need to reposition? Do we need to ask for more resources? And I'll close by saying, certainly, CENTCOM commanders, we know that we would like to position forces to other parts of the world. I've been part of those discussions. The pacing fence is China. It certainly isn't Iran. And so you work in an environment that requires you to talk to DC and talk to the chairman, talk to the secretary about how you're going to divide these resources to accomplish these fairly shorter goals in the Middle East against the very long-term goal of achieving stability and deterrence against China in the Western Pacific.
That's great, General. Thank you. All right, Alan, I think this one's for you. So got several questions about, let's imagine that the Iranians were willing to come back to the table, right? That as part of a ceasefire agreement, the Iranians had to come back to the table to the nuclear negotiations. What do you think would be possible to get from them? And what would you be looking to get from them at this point in time? I mean, these attacks, the war has changed the circumstances from the negotiations that were going on beforehand.
I mean, again, I'll accept your premises for the purposes of the question. And I think Iran is more than willing to return to the negotiating table if it gets Israel to stop bombing. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're willing to be more flexible in terms of their red line. I mean, I think it is still the case that Iran sees a foregoing enrichment on Iranian soil as an admission of surrender. And, the people running Iran have been there for a long, long time. Most of them are veterans of the Iran-Iraq War. So they don't panic easily, which is not to say they're not panicking now. But I think they have a high tolerance for pain. But I don't necessarily think that they'd be willing to change significantly their red lines. I mean, I think President Trump has said, and others have said, that perhaps we should seek more maximalist goals in terms of getting Iran to limit its proxies, to halt its missile force, whatever. I think at this point, Iran is willing to signal a willingness to anything just to get to the table. But as I know from firsthand experience, once Iran is at the table and can get a sort of breathe a sigh of relief, it's willing to just stretch things out and take back tomorrow what it said yesterday, and argue over subordinate clauses in the sentence you agreed to last week. So yeah, I think Iran right now is scrambling to get Israel to stop bombing. And if that means signaling a willingness to change its red lines, it could well do that. But Israel knows this. Israel is not going to say, oh, wait a second, Iran is signaling it'd be willing to perhaps change its red lines, so we'll stop bombing. I mean, I think regardless of what Iran signals diplomatically, Israel is going to continue its attacks until it takes away not the intention, but the capability. Because what worries Israel is not intentions. Intentions change. It's Iran's capability. And that is what it wants to extirpate.
That's great. All right, Barbara, this next one I think is clearly for you, which is Gaza. Gaza has been kind of lost in all of this. And we've got a number of different questions here around how should the US, how should the international community be thinking about Gaza in the aftermath of this war, whenever that is? Does this create opportunities for Gaza? Obviously, it creates more humanitarian problems, or has been, but is this good for Gaza potentially? Is it bad for Gaza potentially? What should the U.S., what should the international community be looking to do in the aftermath of this war to perhaps take advantage of different outcomes from the war?
So look, I think in the short and in the medium term, the people of Gaza, the Palestinians of Gaza, are very much hurt by this conflict because it diverts attention wholly away from Gaza, which was the central feature, the central issue of the region, and a major issue between the administration and the Israeli government. It diverts to a larger one. It was something I always feared might be the case, because President Trump came into office wanting to, yes, get hostages home, and most importantly, American hostages, but really wanted the conflict ended as a stepping stone to normalization, alongside this desire to get to a nuclear agreement with Iran. I had the feeling from the get-go that Gaza would show itself demonstrably so complex and difficult to resolve because of Israeli internal politics, because of the continuing failure or refusal to define end goals in that conflict, and most importantly, post-conflict goals. So President Trump would veer towards Iran and focus on that to the exclusion or to the lessening the priority of Gaza. And I think that is even more the case now. So in the aftermath of this conflict between Iran and Israel, the attention will naturally be, and the energies of his appointed envoy, Steve Witkoff, will be entirely on Iran. And as Witkoff and company found, as the president found in this 60-day effort, it is really, really difficult, complex, a task to get the Iranians to where you want to go, even to an interim agreement. And as Alan knows better than any of us here, the mastery of the slip and slide approach of the Iranians to negotiations on anything. So what do you need in Gaza? The same thing you needed a year ago, a year and a half ago, 6 months ago. You need a defined post-conflict set of arrangements, security, governance, and of course, reconstruction is sort of the easy part, but security and governance, and those are absolutely political problems that have not been addressed.
Great. General, I got two for you, and I think they're big questions, but you take them where you'd like to take them. So the first one of those is the technical aspects. Anything surprised you in this war? Obviously, the Israelis are brilliant in how they wage warfare. But anything is surprising, obviously we have an extensive relationship with them. We've been working with them for a while, as you point out. They got brought into CENTCOM, which was a very big plus in terms of easing that cooperation. Anything surprise you technically in this war? Something that you saw that kind of made you say, oh, I hadn't seen that before. And then I think a related question is the increasing reliance on targeted assassination, right? And obviously the Israelis are masters at it, but we in some ways kind of helped write the book, and we're seeing it in Russia and Ukraine, right? This is becoming a very common thing, and as a veteran of the U.S. military, someone who has thought about these kinds of issues at all levels, how does the emergence of targeted killing and the ability to do so with drones, how does that change your thinking, or how should that change our thinking about wars? I mean, all this stuff that right now the Israelis are able to do to the Iranians pretty much with impunity, there's the real risk that someday somebody's going to be able to do to us. So those are two, the technical piece and then the targeted killings piece.
Sure, Ken. So sort of two things that struck me about this conflict. One is the inability of the Iranians to get any better at operational security. and to take measures to improve their leakiness. They can't seem to do it. And I think we're now going to see a huge counterintelligence era in Iranian history, and that's good for us because the counterintelligence era in American military diplomatic history wasn't a great era. It damaged us. I believe it will damage the Iranians for many years to come as they try to find out who on the inside is talking, and more power to them as they do that. The second thing, though, is probably we saw a little bit of it in Ukraine. It's the mixture of long-range strikes and extreme short-range drones. You saw it again, a little bit of it with the Ukraine strikes on the Russian strategic aircraft fleet, but you saw it even more here, where you've got long-range Israeli aircraft, presumably low observable aircraft, operating over Tehran and other targets, mixed with or preceded by short-range drones that have been launched clearly within the territorial limits of Iran and possibly within Tehran itself. The ability to mix those is, in fact, I think, going to become increasingly important going forward. And you're right to point out we should take a note on that. There is no nation in the world more vulnerable to these tactics than the United States. We will reap this in the future unless we take notes and prepare to defend ourselves from operations like this. But that combination of long-range, high-tech, and standoff missiles, bombs, and then drones of both large and small, because I think Israelis use both long-range drones, probably some low observable drones, and short-range, extremely inexpensive drones to address some of these targets. I think all of that is very important. The other point you talked about was assassination. Well, as you know, Ken, assassination is illegal under U.S. law, and the United States doesn't execute that. I have some personal experience with that. And so targeted strikes, you do them when they're necessary. You don't assassinate because that would be illegal. And I'll let others argue about what the efficacy or the legality of what Israel's doing. We don't need to talk about that this afternoon. But I would say that the ability to reach out and strike selected members of the chain of command has a powerful effect on slowing the response and skewing the response. And I think the Israeli actions in doing it over the last 120 hours or so, well, since this campaign began, have been masterful. It has shaped the Iranian response. It has slowed the Iranian response, and it also feeds into the great counterintelligence narrative that is now going to be told inside the various security organs of Iran as they search feverishly to find these loopholes, find these penetrating agents that are there. So I think it's a virtuous circle. If you want to see an Iran that's further weakened and embittered in the days ahead. I'll pause there.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Alan, so your original comments about the potential for regime change in Iran, boy, you set off a firestorm there. So now you're going to have to clean up your mess.
I take it back. I was only kidding.
There are a lot of people who want to hear at least a little bit, because again, we only got 10 minutes left, and would like to, there's one more question I want to put to Barbara at the very least, and if I can sneak another into the general, that'd be great. But in particular, the question of what comes next. All right, so topple the regime, as you pointed out, not clear what comes next. And I think a lot of the questions that are getting asked, what they're really getting at is this issue of, is there some way that either the Israelis or we or both of us together, or God help us, we bring in a whole bunch of others, the Scandinavians, who the heck knows, is there some way to be able to shape the future in Iran after this regime falls, to get a more Western-oriented, more internationally minded, less belligerent, less odious regime? Is that even possible?
I mean, anything's possible, but the short answer to your question is no. Let me expand on that. I'm drawn to the longer time frames. So what happens in the next few days? The only variable I think that's yet to be decided is whether Israel can draw on the U.S. Other than that, as I said earlier, I have to assume Israel is going to take out whatever it wants to take out. So to me, what's interesting is to what extent their targeting is going after the goal of regime change. We saw a little of it with attacking Iran's energy infrastructure. We saw a little of it of attacking the IRIB, Voice and Vision. So to me, that's what's most interesting is how extensive will Israeli efforts be to topple this regime? And again, regime change, topple, I mean, maybe it's logically equivalent, but let's this is not a plug and play where there's something else waiting. And I think it would be foolhardy to assume that a change of regime in Iran is necessarily for the better, because the alternative to this odious regime is not a well-run pro-Western regime that runs like a Swiss watch. It's a dysfunctional, broken down military, as the general said, securitized witch hunting regime that is increasingly unable to deliver essential goods and services to an increasing number of Iranians. So is the U.S. able to manage events so that we get a better regime? I think that, based on history, highly unlikely. That doesn't mean we have no capacity to influence what's going to happen in Iran. I just think we have zero capacity to influence it in a managed way that serves our national interest. So again, the key variable here, what are the Iranian people going to do? You know, and you and I can both turn on X right now and find a million spokespeople for the Iranian regime, many of whom living outside, or for the Iranian people, many of whom live outside Iran, many of whom live inside the Beltway, telling us what the Iranian people think right now. But that is specious. You know, there's 88 million of these people, and there's a wide variety of views. The regime is undoubtedly very unpopular, and there are a lot of people who would like to have it go away, but it depends on the alternative. And right now, I don't see any viable alternatives to what's in place now that we can just reach for on the shelf and plug in. So that's my concern. My concern is a governance vacuum in Iran that causes further regional destabilization.
That's great. Okay, Barbara, this one's for you. Or at least I think it's for you. I'm going to give it to you.
Can I just add a clamorous association of myself with what Alan just said? I mean, Iran is not Iraq. Let me just stipulate for the record. But you know, we went in without a plan, or with what we thought was a notional plan, and with what we thought was a, you know, expatriate group of Iraqis that could really sort of, you know, technocrats, et cetera, could sort of put the wheels back on this broken, you know, country government and get it off to the races. And there was an assumption that since, you know, a large portion of the public hated Saddam and had been oppressed by him, you know, 60% at least, maybe some of the Sunni as well, that there would be a clamor that would not just welcome us, but would sustain this. And look how that ended up. So it's very easy to decapitate. It's very easy to do regime change. It is quite another thing to do regime creation. I'll just stop with that one. And your question.
Okay, so question for you, the Houthis. Everybody wants to hear, not everybody, but I got, you know, 5 or 6 questions. People asking, they're another dog that isn't barking. What happens to them at the end of this fight?
Well, you know, the problem with the Houthi, like many of the proxies or many of the elements that were in this network of proxies, you know, they weren't all the same in terms of the sort of command and control, the point and shoot sort of aspect of Iran's control and direction over them. But what Iran did lethally was give them a capability, including a capability to manufacture these advanced armaments that they have been using against commercial ships, against Saudi Arabia for several years, against whoever they wanted to, basically. Their successes, as they view them, as the Houthi leadership in its own messianic way views their successes of that, you know, year and a half or more of shooting, trying to shoot at Israel, occasionally landing a drone right in downtown Tel Aviv, really stimulated their appetite, really stimulated their ambitions, and of course, especially their ability to hold hostage the Bab el-Mandeb choke point. They reveled in it. They still do. So Iran pulling, if Iran should be unable or is made unwilling to provide it with that train of parts and so forth that gave them those capabilities, they'll manufacture the parts. They'll continue to go to China for them. But what Iran dangerously created was the capability. So I don't see that going away. They've been quiet because they, like others, were sort of stunned at the operation. They were also stunned by a strike that was made against their military leadership. They'll come back online.
Great. All right, General, last question for you, or you get the last question. And kind of touched on it before, but it's a big one. Again, a lot of people asking different versions of it, which is what in your mind would be most likely to drive Iran to bring the United States into this conflict? Again, as former CENTCOM commander, what would worry you most in terms of what might cause the Iranians to decide that it's a good idea to take us on?
So, Ken, I go back to, I think Iranian statecraft is built around the theory that regime preservation is the highest goal. Um, and I think we just need to remember that as we talk about this. They've negotiated adverse agreements before. They did it in the Iran-Iraq War, drinking from the poison chalice. It's a well-known observation of Iranian statecraft. I think that if they choose to widen the war, it would be an act of sheer desperation, and I believe it would be built on a faulty assumption that somehow that would lead to us ultimately, mediating or assuming now we're in the fight. Now maybe the United States will play a role in ending the fight. I think that's an extremely slender logic train to build a decision to bring us in on. In fact, there's absolutely no reason for Iran to bring us into this fight. In fact, they should seek to avoid it. Whatever else they do or don't do, they should keep us out. So I think I would argue it's a logical malpractice to bring us in if they chose to do that. Of course, nations make decisions for other reasons than logic. They make decisions from emotion. We all know our Thucydides about why nations make decisions. So that might be it might not necessarily be made on the cold, hard merits of the case. I think there's a very real possibility they'll do this, but I think it is a dangerous path for them to go down on. One last thing I would just like to say is jump on Alan's excellent comments and Barbara's as well. I'd like to say, look, if we get an Iran out of this that is dysfunctional, broken down, in a state of continual internal purging, and where people aren't doing very well, in other words, a failed state, I believe there are probably worse outcomes for the region than that. Because that failed state will find it difficult to dabble in the affairs of its neighbors effectively. I'm not saying it won't try, but it will be harder to do. That's a hard and harsh judgment on Iran, but that might reflect Israeli thinking in this. It's not a good thing. It's certainly not a good thing for the 92 million people who live in Iran about their future. But it might be the alternative of Iran continuing to be a regional hegemon that's intent on destruction of the state of Israel, the ejection of the United States from the region, and pushing a rigid militant Shia theology across the region.
As all four of us have experienced in our own careers in government, yeah, oftentimes you're not looking for the best option, you're just looking for the least bad. That's a great place to leave us off. Thank you very much, General. Barbara, Alan, Frank, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the audience. I hope this was helpful to you. And just a programming note, we will be doing this again Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. We will have General Scott Benedict, another former Marine. We will have Colby Connolly, who will talk about energy, and I'll pitch in on Iran, Israel, and everything else that they can't. So look forward to seeing you Wednesday morning. And again, thank you all very much for this terrific panel.